Hey, welcome back to the podcast. So, as we get started this week with the Metabolic Reset, the small group that I am coaching over the next 8 weeks to work towards speeding up metabolisms and working towards faster weight loss, I wanted to continue on our deep dives into hormones here on the podcast because the topic of today, cortisol, is absolutely related to our metabolism and our body's ability to let fat go. So let's talk first about what cortisol really even is, because I think some people are not really sure. So, cortisol is a hormone, it's our stress hormone. It is released by the adrenal cortex in small amounts in a circadian rhythm, meaning like on a 24-hour cycle. Now, this is released in larger amounts during times of stress or in response to a stressor. Cortisol kind of gets a bad rep, or it kind of seems like a bad thing that we don't want to have a lot of, but we actually do need cortisol. Cortisol is very essential to keeping us alive and keeping us moving and functioning and doing what we're supposed to do. Cortisol has a lot of jobs. So, some of those are to help control blood sugar, help regulate our mood and our metabolism, helps reduce inflammation, and it also assists with some of our memory functions. So, like I said before, I think that sometimes cortisol, when you hear it or you see it on the internet, it can kind of be this thing where you think you want to have low cortisol levels or you want to not have any cortisol at all. And that's not true. That you would feel very terrible if you didn't have any cortisol. It's like what gets us up and going in the mornings, literally kind of, helps keep us alive, wakes us up in the morning, gets us going. But I do want to talk about some of the symptom differences between a high cortisol level and a low cortisol level. But before I get into that, I do want to emphasize that cortisol is meant to fluctuate. It's meant to go up and down. That's how it supports our body. It's how our body kind of can differentiate and respond in stressful situations. It's one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that helps us respond appropriately when we are in very dangerous or life-threatening situations. So just keep that in mind. And like I said before, it's supposed to fluctuate throughout the day. There are periods during the day, and I'll get to this in just a little bit. There's periods of time during the day where we want the cortisol level to be higher, and then there's other times where we want it to be lower. So, first up, let's talk about some of the signs and symptoms that come along with low cortisol levels. This is going to be things like fatigue, burnout, low mood, low motivation, low libido, sometimes can be sleep apnea. Orthostatic hypotension, which if you don't know what that is, it's like when you're sitting in a chair or maybe on the couch or something and you get up and you almost kind of have like the vision changes where you're like, whoa, I just stood up way too quick. That's orthostatic hypotension. Typically, it's when you move from one position to another quickly and your blood pressure drops in that transition. And then also other symptoms of low cortisol are feelings of dizziness, weakness, and fainting episodes. On the flip side of that, signs and symptoms of high cortisol levels: anxiety, depression, panic attacks, insomnia, weight gain specifically in the abdomen or holding on to belly fat, brain fog, inflammation, pain, insulin or blood sugar dysregulation, a high blood pressure, and hair loss. So, in general, you can kind of see the similarities there. Signs and symptoms of low cortisol is going to be like low, damper, negative feelings, whereas signs of high cortisol are kind of these like amped up, anxious, jittery feelings. And that's because since cortisol helps us respond in stressful situations, it does when we kind of have like a surge of cortisol or a spike in our cortisol, it amps us up a little bit. It puts us on high alert, kind of puts us on edge, kind of peps us up a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why, we want to have cortisol and why I said it helps keep us alive, because the natural pattern of cortisol would be that about 30 minutes to an hour after we wake up in the mornings, that is when our cortisol should be at its highest point throughout the day. That increase in that level is what gets us up, gets us going, gets us motivated to get ready to go to school or work or wherever we have to go for the day. And we want to see that. Then we want to see, kind of a decline, and then almost not necessarily a steady level. Like, you don't want to see a straight line if you were looking at this on a graph or on someone's test results, but we want it to be fairly steady throughout the rest of the day. And we want it to be at its lowest point before bed, because cortisol and melatonin work, they're inverse of one another. Cortisol goes up, melatonin goes down. Melatonin goes up, cortisol goes down. And that's what we want at bedtime. We want our body to be able to get into a state where we feel restful and we can easily fall asleep, and we get in not just sleep, but we get into a good, deep quality of sleep. So, some of the different ways that we can help support our body to produce cortisol in a way that is supportive to us feeling really well and functioning really optimally. Morning light in the morning time, right when you're first waking up, and with even still, if you can't do it as soon as you get up, but within the first couple of hours before 10 a.m. in the morning, if you can get outside and without any glasses, sunglasses, a lot of contacts block it. So if you can take your contacts out, if you can go outside with your naked eyes and be in the sunlight, that helps our body know like what time of day it is and how much cortisol to produce. And it helps sync up and set our circadian rhythm. You also want to take a stress inventory on your life. What are my different forms of stressors? Where is the majority of my stress coming from? Is there anything that I can do to change that? Is there maybe some things I need to experiment with as stress relievers to find what it is that works for me to help me feel less stressed? And then beyond that, stress is not just like, oh my gosh, I have 50 projects at work or school to do, and I don't know how I'm going to get it all done. Stress is also, I skipped breakfast and lunch today because I was so busy. That lack of food is a stressor on our body. The amount of toxins and dyes and preservatives and just fake stuff that we put in our body that it then has to filter out, send to the liver to like detox us from, that is a form of stress on the body. It's sometimes something that we can't control, but it's a form of stress for the body. And then of course there is the mental, emotional stressors as well. So you want to think of all of those things. You want to think of like, okay, if I was doing this like on a sheet of paper as like a assignment or as I don't know, like a workshop type thing, I would almost, in my mind, when I think about this, I think of like a white sheet of paper with an outline in black of a bucket. And like, this is my stress bucket. What are all of the things that I am putting into this bucket that's contributing to filling up my stress bucket? And then I want to like look down at the bucket, like, what can I take away from this? What can I change? How can I shift something to do better? And you guys may have heard me say this before, but I do not subscribe to the belief that stress is a choice, because I think there are so many things that happen to us in life that are not within our control, that are stressful. And yes, we do have the power to choose how we react to something and how we deal with the fallout of it later. That like immediate initial reaction to something, to a certain extent, is out of our control. And I don't ever want to just be telling you, oh, you need to stress less to help manage your cortisol. I just don't think that's very actionable, helpful advice. I want to give you tools and insights and the ability to reflect on things and giving you prompts to prompt that thought and that reflection on how you can better manage and react to your stress so that you can build up your stress resiliency over time and then in the future react better or maybe even have a little bit of a pause before you have an immediate reaction in a stressful situation. But that takes time. It's not something that you can just like fix right now overnight and say, I'm going to do this differently. It doesn't work that way. Okay. Other things to consider when you are trying to work on supporting good cortisol levels. Eating consistently. I already kind of touched on this, but not skipping meals. And then also just thinking about in general, trying to consume like foods and calories in a way that it's consistent. It's not like yesterday I ate 2,000 calories. Today I'm eating 1,000 or some big variation, between. Like our body wants to have that consistency because that consistency feels very predictable for our body and it makes it feel very safe. And we want our body to feel safe. We want to talk about minerals. We always want to talk about minerals. Minerals are not made in our body. We cannot make them ourselves. We have to consume them in our foods and in our diet and in supplements when necessary. And there's a lot of things that deplete our minerals on a daily basis. And there's times of life like pregnancy, breastfeeding, raising kids, going through a traumatic experience, maybe losing a loved one, going through maybe a big shift in your career. Things that are big stressors like that are also big mineral depleters. And if we are not very intentional with how we are replenishing those stores, especially if we don't have any testing to back up what our current mineral levels are, if we don't know and we're just kind of guessing, then it's really easy to get in a place where you're super depleted. And because you're depleted, your body doesn't have what it needs to operate at full capacity. It would be like telling someone, I need you to get ready to serve dinner to 100 people. Here's 100 plates, but you've only got 75 forks to work with. Best of luck. Okay, when we are lacking in minerals, our body just doesn't have everything it needs. And we might be able to get by without them. We're not going to die initially, without them, but the body can't work efficiently. And the last thing then is thinking of your movement and what forms and types of exercise that you are currently doing. I don't want people to use this as an excuse to not exercise because I've seen that in the past, and that is not what I mean by what I'm about to say. But exercise can be a form of stress on the body. It is a form of stress on the body. There's times when that is a very good thing. And there are times when our body is already in a very stressed out state, and adding on an additional stressor through exercise actually does us more harm than good in the long run. So if you're in a time period of your life where you feel like I am so stressed and I don't want to stress my body out even further, then it's time to not sit down on the couch and not move or not do exercise. It's time to shift what types of exercise you're doing and let it be things that are a little more restorative and calming, such as just simply going for a walk, doing some yoga, doing some stretching, maybe light weight and strength routines, things that are just, they're still working your body. They're still helping you to move. They're still helping you to build strength and muscles, but they're not overtaxing your system. Okay, now I put out a message that I was going to be recording an episode on cortisol. And I let people submit questions, and I got a lot of good ones, but there's a few here that I wanted to cover in this episode in particular because I think that they're really important. So, first of all, the first question was, why do I feel so tired in the morning, but then I can't fall asleep at night? And the initial thing, if someone came to me and they said, this is my problem, the first thing that I would want to talk to them about and get them doing is that morning light piece. And it doesn't just stop at the morning, initially getting that morning light, but it's also looking at like, how much of your day are you spending in artificial light? And then towards the end of the day, and as you're winding down to go to bed, what's your environment like? Do you have every light in the house on? Do you have some dimmable lights? Do you have blue light blockers that you can put on? In the morning time, are you like trying to get ready in the dungeon darkness, or do you have natural light coming in your windows? Can you take 5 minutes to go outside on the front porch before you dive headfirst into your day and get ready? What does that look like, and how can we better support that piece? Because the reason that this is happening is because of that initial, how earlier I said we want to see an initial rise in your cortisol right after you wake up. Within the first 30 minutes to an hour, that's when your cortisol should be the highest. This person is not getting that. If I were to do a Dutch test with them and check their cortisol levels, there likely would not be a raise at all, or it would be very slight. And this is, one time where we want to see kind of like a spike almost in the level. And then at nighttime, they are having too much cortisol and not enough melatonin as they're trying to wind down and go to bed. And there can be reasons for that too, beyond just your environment and the light exposure. Maybe it's really freaking stressful every night when you put your kids to bed. And that stressful event is causing you to release cortisol. And then you're like almost immediately laying down and trying to go to sleep yourself. And you're just like so wound up that you can't. Or maybe you're somebody that the only time of day that you can work out is at night. And so you're doing an intense workout at 7:30, 8 p.m., taking a shower and trying to go to bed. You've done something or encountered something that caused your body to release extra cortisol at that time. So now you have more cortisol in the evenings than you should. And it's preventing you from being able to go to sleep. And it's causing that like insomnia type symptom where you can't fall asleep. And then in the morning, you're still super tired, draggy, can't get out of the bed. And if you don't like fix that, get really intentional and find a solution to that, it's kind of just this endless cycle that you get into because your circadian rhythm is not following the normal pattern that it should. Okay, question number 2. Can stress really cause my weight to stick around even when I'm eating healthy and working out? Yep. And this is a big problem for women. A lot of the women that I'm currently working with through the Metabolic Reset group, I wouldn't care to bet that cortisol is playing a part for all of us right now with, the weight loss goals that we have and just like being at the current weight that we are. Women and moms in particular have a lot of stress and a lot of things on their plate that, again, like I said earlier, they kind of can't control. It's like not something you can just easily take off your plate. And that stress over time leads to higher cortisol levels. And that higher cortisol level is telling your body to store fat around the belly. So yes, it absolutely can. Question number 3, how do I know if my levels are high or low? So of course, first of all, you can look at your symptoms. You can listen back to the beginning of this episode and think like, where do my symptoms most align? And you can guess whether you're high or low. But like I've said a few times in the episode, your cortisol level is meant to fluctuate, and it's meant to fluctuate based on your body's needs and your mood and what you're encountering in your life. So it's not always black and white. You might look at that list of symptoms from low and look at the symptoms from high, and you might think, well, I have some of both of these. And honestly, that's very common. So without testing, we wouldn't really know for sure. And in terms of cortisol testing and how you get cortisol testing, there's a lot of different options out there. I do not recommend blood testing for this because it's just not as accurate. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of them being that the act of going and getting your blood drawn is a stressor on the body. And that's even if you're not someone that's like, I'm not scared to have my blood drawn, but just like it's like a whole event though that you have to go do. Like you're driving there, you've got to register, you got to go in, you got to get to the right place. It's like you're having to do all of these things before you actually sit down in the chair and they stick your arm and draw your blood and draw the level. And, a lot of times those things don't all go perfectly. Plus, then you've had time since you've woken up till you got to the hospital or the facility or wherever you're going to go get this done. You've probably encountered some things that are stressful along the way. So I just don't find that it's very accurate. But Dutch testing or saliva testing in general, there's other options, but Dutch happens to be my favorite. For cortisol is, in my opinion, the most accurate way to look at it. And you can also do this through a Dutch test with just the urine samples. And I think that's it's my preferred way to test it in my clients and on myself. We can see the 24-hour pattern that way. And it just really helps us to know where you stand without having to guess based off those symptoms. It's always best, in my opinion, to test it and know rather than to guess and start. Especially if you're looking for supplements to help with this, you really want to know for sure, where am I at? Now, there are things like some adaptogenic herbs that would be good either way, because that's kind of the whole purpose of an adaptogen. It's going to adapt to what your body needs. So it's not going to matter if your levels are high or low. It's going to help support you either way. A lot of the practices for like lifestyle and habits are going to be the same in terms of we want to have good, consistent meals. We want to support blood sugar. We want to support the way that we manage and respond to stress. That's going to be the same regardless of whether you're high or low. But if you're looking to take a supplement because you feel like your symptoms are so extreme one way or the other that you have high or low, you want to make sure that you are correct in your assumption of which category you fall into. Because if not, and you start taking supplements and it's the wrong supplement, like let's say you think you have really high cortisol and you start taking a supplement that's targeted at bringing that down, but in reality, on testing, you have low cortisol, then that supplement that you just started taking is going to bottom you out even further and going to make you feel worse. We don't want that. All right, question number 4. What's the difference between adrenal fatigue and imbalanced cortisol? You're going to hear talk about cortisol referred to as so many things. You're going to hear burnout, adrenal fatigue, imbalanced cortisol. In general, we're all talking about the same thing. I think that adrenal fatigue or even burnout makes it sound like your body is broken and that there's no longer being cortisol produced, like at all. But that's not true. It's just that there is a disruption and an imbalance in the normal pattern of production and the way that our body responds to that level of production. And that's what we want to work to correct. So it's not necessarily like if this person had a more specific question, I might could give a little more context, but hopefully in general, that helps answer that question. And then number 5, last question that we've got here. What's one thing that I can do right away, right now, implement easily to support me having healthy cortisol levels? I have to give this one some thought because I think there are a lot of different directions that you could go with this. And there's a lot of things that could be perceived as easy measures. So I think this is going to be very person dependent in what your capacity is, what your schedule looks like. But the most impactful thing I think you could do if you can work it out is to focus on the morning light and how much light you're getting, how much artificial light you're being exposed to throughout the day, and getting into natural light, trying to be back outside again for a few minutes around sunset. It just helps support that circadian rhythm. And that is a obviously like free thing to do. Hopefully it's pretty easy for you to implement. And there are workarounds, if you can't get outside, or here in a few more months, I'm recording this in August, but we are fast approaching fall, and when days are going to get shorter and shorter, unfortunately. And it may not be practical for you to be in the daylight before you go to work. That used to be my reality when I was still working bedside nursing. In the winter months, I went to work in the dark and I came home in the dark, and it sucked. But, we have to find ways to work around that. So I'm actually looking at it right now on my desk. I have what's called a happy light. I didn't buy it back then. I've bought it now, and I did it because I'm obviously not on video right now, but in my office, I don't have any windows, and I spend a lot of time in here during the day. And I am very mindful of like getting up and getting out and going outside on breaks. That's why I eat lunch outside a lot of times. But that's definitely impactful. And so this happy light that I purchased, sometimes I turn it on first thing in the morning if I haven't had time to get outside or be in natural light, because it's supposed to imitate, those specific like UV rays that help support your circadian rhythm. And then at night, I'm just like everybody else. We watch TV at night. That is, when my kids go to bed and my husband and I get time to watch a show together that's like an adult show that we don't watch when our kids are around. We turn on Yellowstone or Suits or whatever it might be. I don't want to miss out on that. And I don't want to sit there and be like, no, we can't turn the TV on because I don't want blue light exposure. There's things you can do. Like I have blue light blocking glasses. I just upgraded to a new pair actually, and they weren't even really that expensive, that are better than what I had before, that are truly filtering out some additional blue light that I probably wasn't before because I had the clear lenses. These have like the yellow amber colored lenses in them, and I actually really, really like them. And I really like the way that light and stuff like looks through them, which sounds weird. If you have some and you wear some, then if you know, you know. But yeah, and then there's settings on like your phone that you can reduce the amount of blue light. And I'm not saying that it's all, it's not all or nothing. All of those little efforts do help. So don't tell yourself like, well, I can't do that, so I'm just not going to try at all. Like find the little things, even if you're like partially doing it or you're taking a half step in the right direction, it's better than no step at all. Um, and it's not something that when you're working on your cortisol levels, it's also not something that you're going to see an immediate improvement with. You can see improvements pretty quickly, especially with light and stuff, but it's always important to remember with anything, but specifically cortisol, it took you a long time to get to this point. It's not feasible to think that in like a week you're going to have this corrected, or a day, or it took you a long time to get here, and thank goodness like you're making different choices now and you're doing better. But keep realistically thinking of how long it took you to get to this point and how long it might take to like balance things out and correct this. And don't just give up after a week and think, well, I've been doing all that stuff all week long and I don't feel any different. Nothing has helped. Don't let that defeat you and discourage you. Keep going. That all the effort compounds over time, and it eventually will pay off, and you will feel better and you will be able to tell a difference. It's just not going to be immediate. So If you are someone that is looking for support with your hormones, your metabolism, your female sex hormones for your periods, that is the work that I am here to do. That is what I love to do. I love working with my clients. Um, there is a link in the show notes where you can find out about more ways that you can work with me. And if I have current openings, I do right now. If you're listening to this in August of 2025, I have some openings right now. If it's in the future, just fill out the form and I'll get with you. And then there's also, as always, some free resources linked for you in the show notes. If you are new to me, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to take a look and see what I have there that can maybe support you and help you. And then lastly, don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're loving to listen to your podcast lately. That's a lot of L's. That way you don't ever miss an episode. I typically put out an episode every Tuesday, and I wouldn't want you to miss it next week. So that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope everyone has a fantastic week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday.